oh, my hamstring. I feel like I just tore my hamstring. So if you get that pulling or tugging sensation in your hamstring and pain in the middle of a run, does that necessarily mean that you just tore a hamstring? No, it doesn't. But I'm going to tell you how to know if it is or if it isn't, and what it might be if it isn't. So, how to know if you tore a hamstring. Usually, if you have torn a muscle, you will have swelling. Why? Because you'll have some bleeding in the area because you're actually tearing some of the blood vessels in the muscle as well. And also, you'll have some swelling because your body's going to try to repair it, and swelling is part of the healing process if you tear something. Similarly, you'll usually have bruising or redness or some kind of discoloration, and it will hurt you to touch it. Like physically, if you touch that area, it should hurt you. Similarly, anytime you use that muscle, be it running, walking, weightlifting, picking up your backpack, whatever, it should hurt anytime you use it because you're engaging those torn areas. And so that's going to hurt. So if you are somebody who has pain only when you're running and you had that pop sensation or that pulling sensation a week ago and it still feels like that when you're running only, then it's probably not a muscle tear. And here's what it could be if it's not a muscle tear. If it's not a muscle tear, it could be something like a stress fracture. It could be nerve-based. It could be coming from your spine. Or it could be something in the more rare other category. And so let's start by addressing what a stress fracture would feel like compared to a torn muscle. So if you have a stress fracture, it will hurt you with walking, just like a torn muscle, but you usually won't have a lot of swelling in that area unless it was something that like acutely really fractured and the bone actually like fractured through versus like a small stress fracture. And that one you'll probably know pretty quickly because you won't be able to walk on that one. But if you have a stress fracture in that area, it'll hurt with walking, it'll hurt with running, it'll hurt with impact activity, but it won't hurt you, it won't have that like swelling or anything like that, or usually there's like no discoloration or bruising or anything like that you would see in a torn muscle. And it will usually hurt to touch just like a torn muscle, but it'll usually be in like one little fingerprint type of area. You'll be able to point to it and it's a small area usually. Sometimes stress fractures can radiate pain, but usually it's just, you can point to it with one finger. It's probably more of like a stress fracture rather than a torn muscle. And different than that is if you have a nerve that runs down that area right by the muscle, it will often feel pulling just like a muscle because nerves can actually get tension. Neural tension can cause a lot of pain. It can cause a lot of tightness or that pulling or tugging sensation. So it feels like you just tore a muscle, but in fact, you just injured a nerve. I actually was lucky enough to be running 200s with one of my friends one time when he was like, oh my gosh, I tore a hammy. And then afterwards, I tested his muscle and his muscle was totally fine when I, had him engage it. And then we did a nerve protocol and he felt a lot better and that tightness in the muscle went away. And he like really felt like a pull tug in his hamstring while sprinting a 200, which does seem like a torn muscle, but it wasn't. And so if you have that nerve situation, it could present in a few different ways. It might feel like it's moving up and down the hamstring. It might feel like it's in one area, but you won't have any swelling or bruising or any like lumps of muscle that have torn off in the area, which you can have with a really intense tear. You also can have some weakness in the area, and you don't always have to have pain with walking or running. Like nerve-based pain might sometimes just hurt when you're running. And so in that case, if it's not consistent every time you're using it, it's probably more likely to be nerve-based or something coming from the spine or one of these other issues. So if it's coming from the spine, it'll be kind of similar to nerve-based stuff. It might hurt when you're sitting more often. It might hurt with running. Sometimes it'll hurt with doing weightlifting type of things, but it usually won't hurt when you're walking. And it'll be something that's kind of inconsistent and doesn't really seem as reproducible as a torn muscle. You also won't have the swelling or bruising in that area. And then I think it's also important before the end of this to just mention that there could be some other weird things. Like if you're talking about something in the lower leg, you could have a compartment syndrome. If you went really, really hard on the exercise, you could have something called rhabdomyolysis, where you actually like destroy your muscles and you have like bleeding like everywhere. You basically like, it's basically like death to your muscles. And that's a really rare condition. So that's probably not something that you would have. Compartment syndrome is also pretty rare. Those things would honestly be in another video. So, because those are a little bit wider scope. But the thing to take home from this is if you have a torn muscle, it should be bruised. It might have a lump in it from like an actual torn piece of muscle. There should be swelling. You should be able to point to it, and it should hurt every time you use it, lifting, running, walking. And it should get better with rest within like 2 weeks or so. It should really start to have improvement, and it should be something that hurts when you touch it. If it's not one of those things, get in touch with me. If it is one of those things, still consider getting in touch with me. You can put a comment below. My contact info is in the description, and you can subscribe if you want to learn more about this kind of stuff. I have a lot more videos coming out on some of those other topics that we discussed tonight too. Thank you and have a good one.